Well, good evening. I'd like to talk tonight about, I'd like to actually go back to finish a topic we started earlier in this class, introduce the idea of the middle path. And in that context, I talked about balancing the factors of energy and calm in meditation, that it really requires both. And it takes skill to do that, to find the place where we're really awake and present in an energized way, and yet not anxious or agitated, be very calm. And conversely, how we can be calm and yet not be sleepy, not let that calm and that concentration that we may develop in meditation just make us kind of sink into a stupor. So we talked about that as the middle path, kind of those two factors to and be in balance, not one out of balance with the other. So another two factors that are really important for balance I want to address tonight is faith and discernment. So faith is really necessary to get very far in this endeavor. It's that which really allows us to lean into and trust the practice. If we don't really lean into this and apply it with some enthusiasm, we don't get very far. And that really requires quality of faith, quality of confidence in the teaching, and that it will lead somewhere, that you can do it, and that it's exciting. It's exciting to be able to apply something in a way that's transformative. And so I hope at some level that's alive in you. I sense in some way you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be spending your Tuesday evenings listening to me and everybody else if there weren't some level of faith that this matters and that this works, that that's operating there. Faith can be, can be out of balance. I know when I was starting out, there was a lot of enthusiasm for the practice. And I would throw myself into it with great kind of gusto. But there wasn't a lot of wisdom. And so I would throw myself into it, and there would be, pain would come up. I would be trying really too hard, and it would create a lot of tension, a lot of, I had the ability to kind of really make effort, but it wasn't very balanced effort, and it wasn't patient. So there wasn't the wisdom factor there so much. So even though we need that kind of enthusiasm, that sort of really leaning into it, it needs to be balanced by wisdom. And in this case, I think patience, and kind of knowing the right kind of effort that this practice takes. A sustained kind of going back over and over again to being mindful. Because my faith would kind of run ahead of me and try to imagine the place I was going to get to. And that wasn't so helpful. One of the things that shows when your practice is kind of not balanced between faith and discernment, between faith and wisdom. I'm kind of using discernment and wisdom as the same thing. They're one word, panya in Pali, that I'm trying to translate. So one of the things that happens is sometimes you start to fantasize. And I remember early in my practice kind of being caught up in the fantasy of the perfect person I was going to be when I was enlightened. you know? And so there I would be. And of course, my intention would be to just be feeling the breath and the sensations of the breath and actually being present. But boy, it was seductive for my mind to go off into these sorts of images, which I eventually started to see through, that they were really images of being invulnerable. I thought that somehow awakening was going to make me invulnerable. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm, but not much presence in that. So another memory of early in my practice that always makes me kind of smile is sitting in the hall with Joseph Goldstein and having this fantasy that he was going to give me a medal at the end of the retreat for the most improved meditator. And you know, and these things, they're sort of like dreams. They just sort of take you over and you don't actually see what's going on. And as soon as I would like suddenly become mindful again and like notice where my mind had gone, it was ridiculous. I would start to laugh. And but something very, very much wanted to be honored in that practice, as you know. And it was really an attempt of my mind to deal with the suffering that was present, the pain in my body. It's very uncomfortable in my body. Um, and the discouragement that would sometimes lurk there. So that's really kind of the faith is the antidote to discouragement. But sometimes when faith gets kind of overwrought, it's a defense almost against being discouraged. And so this is where really discernment and wisdom come in. We do need the enthusiasm. We do need the confidence. It's not so helpful to have the fantasy. And it's, you know, again, discouragement is a part of not understanding the way that the practice unfolds and kind of wanting to be ahead of yourself. And I was very impatient. I shouldn't probably use the past tense. I am very impatient in some ways as a personality, as a character. So really the faith is kind of an antidote to that. And so you might just notice the quality of faith in your practice this week, the confidence that you have in it and what you're doing. And generally, the fruit of a balanced faith is consistent application of the practice and not getting too discouraged or upset at obstacles. I also can just mention about faith. I have told this story. I think I did a whole course on faith last year, but that early on for me, faith was kindled by teachers. There was something about the teachers that I had on my first retreats that gave me the felt sense of what was possible. That my kind of tortured mind, that there was hope for it, and I could feel that quality in them. I could feel something that I really longed for in the teachers. So even though I didn't necessarily embody it, something very comforting in having their presence. So that can also be a way to lift up your faith, balance your faith, if that's needed. So I'll talk a little bit about the other factor, discernment or wisdom. I mean, in some sense, this practice is all about that. I have been known to say, that the practice is about discernment, discernment, and discernment, because it's wisdom that liberates us. It's not being good at meditating. It's not, trying to live up to what you think a good Buddhist should be. It's actually seeing deeply into the nature of things, and that's wisdom. And in this practice, wisdom is a matter of the intuitive awareness, the intuitive understanding that we have, actually meeting our experience moment to moment and seeing deeply into it, seeing what is actually true about it in a very concrete and immediate sense. And one of the ways that it kind of gets out of balance, and I think this is particularly true of people who grow up in the West, is that we rely on our intellect too much. So hearing that wisdom is important and hearing that discernment is important, we think that knowing a lot about the practice is going to be helpful, you know? And so we may buy a lot of Buddhist books and read a lot of Buddhist books. Or in the midst of our practice, we may try to analyze ourselves in a conceptual way and start to interpret our experience, start to read things into it. And so that is always the danger, of course, of reading. It's even the danger of a course like this, I have to say, and the kinds of information that I give you. And the Dharma is very much, in a beautiful way, it's laid out as, these lists of things. And I'm in the middle of one now, there's a list of faith and wisdom and energy and concentration as things to balance. You can find that in the Dharma. So it's possible for one to rely too heavily on that kind of understanding and not necessarily the deeper wisdom. There's a deeper wisdom that comes just through time and patience. It's when we've been through a certain amount of cycles of things that we start to grow wise about them. We try too hard in our meditation, we get discouraged, we slump off, we stop meditating. Hopefully it doesn't end there. Then maybe you get another kind of input of some sort that makes you excited. You get excited, you go back to being discouraged if it doesn't. But if you do that with presence, if you do that with mindfulness over time, you might begin to see that it doesn't work to get too worked up about anything that's happening at any given time. You begin to kind of settle into the long haul, settle into patience. And it is not a matter of thinking your way through it. In the same way, you can't think yourself into maturity. I was probably smarter when I was 21 than I am now, by some measures of how quickly I could work things out in my head and memorize things, learn languages, learn information, put two and two together and get four in many, many ways. I feel like in some ways I'm not as intelligent as I was then. But it doesn't matter, really, because that's not actually the long-term game of human life. There's something about living through things that begins to lay down tracks that the intellect can't really by itself lay down, of knowing the territory. And the Buddhist tradition has like three words that it often brings to bear on our experience, which try to articulate this wisdom that you can't think yourself into very well. Impermanence, not self, and suffering. Okay? The three simple words that really are the essence of wisdom that develops over time. Impermanence is tricky because most of us can grasp that intellectually. All right, everything changes. Got that, Mark? I think I understand. Do you really? Do you really understand impermanence? When something that's been there in your life suddenly ends, do you suffer? Does it come as a complete surprise to you? Probably it does come as a complete surprise. It probably is very imbalancing. But over time, if you really notice impermanence moment to moment in your sitting, in your day, and it works itself deeper into you to the place where it's almost on a gut level, you start to get that you can't depend on things to keep being the way they are. All sorts of surprises happen. All sorts of things you thought were secure are not. I think we're entering a period in human history which is going to be unprecedented, to use a word that's been popular in the last several years. Unprecedented disruption. I know that just by knowing what's coming in terms of the climate. I suspect it's also going to include a lot of political instability because there's going to be a lot of human misery, and human misery kindles conflict. And of course, there's all the changes of our world. We just have introduced artificial intelligence to the planet. What in the world is this going to do? We actually have very little idea what it's going to do in the long term. So for that reason, I actually think we're entering a period of greater instability. And that shouldn't just bum you out. I mean, climate change should bum you out, I think. Watching the goodness of the earth's, the hospitable character of the earth for human beings and all the planets, all the animals and plants that are alive right now, that should suddenly be disrupted with mass extinctions and really becoming much, much harder for human beings even to survive. It should be disturbing. So I don't want to undisturb you there, but maybe what I would want to do is, this is really a wake-up bell to practice for us we are going to need equanimity in more and more with each passing year. I really believe that. We are going to need to find our balance. And certainly faith may become important to balance the discernment of the impermanence of things, a faith that we can wake up, that others can wake up, that we can live as a race with greater wisdom than we have up to this point. In some sense, we have to. In some sense, we have to. And so I think of it as really a wake-up bell. So the discernment that I'm talking about, in this case, the discernment of the impermanence of this particular climate and everything it influences, will require our faith. It will require that we not have faith in some things that are not worthy of our faith, but our faith in presence and our faith in the ability of the human heart to awaken. We will have to be present for each other from our heart in ways that we may not ever have imagined. I'll just say that. So impermanence, and to really get that on a deep, deep level, one of the surprises to me, it makes sense when I think about it now, but the deeper that this insight into impermanence has gone in me, the more grateful I have become. You know, it makes some sense because you don't take things for granted that are present, knowing that they could disappear at any moment. You don't take people for granted. You don't take moments of ease and well-being for granted. Moments of health, you don't take for granted. So gratitude, in some sense, I feel, is really one of the fruits of deep insight into impermanence. So not self is another of the wisdom words. So that's kind of a less obvious concept to people. It points to how we don't really own anything here, including even our own body and mind. That this idea of mine, of I, me, mine, is a fabrication. It's something that covers over reality. And as we begin to see reality, for instance, thoughts are impermanent, but they're also not self. The mind just keeps dishing out thoughts, whether we want it or not, whether we ask for them or not. It is this amazing thing, I must say. The mind is amazing. And yet it's not ours. Sometimes I'm humbled by the things that drop in to this mind. And, it would be a source of pride to say, well, I thought that. I came up with that. And sometimes, of course, that is what happens. But it's not strictly true. It's like the very thoughts in our head are gifts. You might think some of them are not very good gifts, but nonetheless, they keep arising of their own. It's pretty amazing. And even mindfulness arises of its own. When we set an intention to be mindful, it arises more often, but it arises of its own. That's a powerful thing to see. And it's difficult to talk about what that actually leads to and the deepening of it. For now, I think what I'm drawn to say is you begin to know on a deep level that your living, your being is this universe living and being. It's not your possession. We carve up the earth into property lines, call it ours, get upset if anybody crosses it, Well, the animals don't know about property lines unless we put up a big fence, Even then, I may find a way around it because it doesn't mean anything to them. They don't have that concept. But humans have that concept, and it's a fiction. We have these vast systems of money and ownership. And I do think we need some sort of system of ownership for things to work out. However, it's all pretend. It's all by agreement. And we forget that. And when that becomes clearer and clearer, it becomes clear that our lives are not here just to benefit ourselves, I can say that I don't want it to be just a thought, but it's likely to be a thought for a while. And what's coming through us, it's very important to honor what's coming through us, because we are the cosmos. We are the cosmos. There is no separation. And our intelligence is the intelligence that's here. Not our own, not our property, but it's what's coming through us. So, I could probably talk on that for a whole class. We'll see. See if this comes up again. And then suffering, of course. Suffering is also a part of wisdom. To recognize just the sheer fact of it is liberating. Idam dukkam. This is suffering. See the fact of it in our lives. And to see its connection with the lack of wisdom, the lack of acceptance of impermanence, the delusion of self and ownership that we operate under, that we labor under, is suffering. And in a sense, everything suffers because it falls apart, because it doesn't last. In that sense, it's also suffering. So these have been really the core of the wisdom teachings from the beginning. And so, hearing them, again, if you just hear them there's a way that you can spin Buddhism that sounds kind of, should I say, morose. It's actually not. So faith operates in kind of tandem with wisdom to create the lightness, to create the openness, to create the letting go that allows us to go deeply into impermanence, not self and suffering, to awaken. It gives us that confidence. When it spins off too intellectual, there can often be a lot of doubt. There can be a lot of fear. It's scary to actually let the truth in. So there can be fear. There can be doubt and self-doubt that swirls around of itself. And, we can even intellectually kind of get a little despairing. So it's the quality of faith that is needed to balance discernment. And the image of them as like two oxen pulling the cart, they have to pull in tandem. They have to work together to get us where we want to go. So after this today, just in a way, so you can look at these things in your life this week. Look at the quality of faith or the lack of it. Look at the quality of discernment or the lack of it. See what sort of imbalance there is and what adjustments could be made. So, all right, thank you.